This is a video about refilling your coolant on a 1979 Fiat 2000. There's a lot of information on the forums and the internet about people trying to fill their drain and flush their cooling system. The manual makes it sound so simple. Well, there's a problem with this system that for some reason makes itself known on some vehicles, and others seem to have no problem with it at all. The thing is, when people do have the problem, it presents as both your thermostat and your heater fan are no longer working, and all you did was a coolant change. So I'm going to walk you through the procedure that worked for me, skipping all the obvious advice about making sure your system is cool. So you start by opening the reservoir cap. If you have a T at the top of your system, this is the highest point, open that up as well. You can then go down underneath the vehicle, down underneath the car on the bottom of the radiator. Here is the fan switch and thermostat. Here is the drain plug for the radiator. So open this drain plug with a pan underneath the car. While you're here, you can take these off and clean the terminals to make sure you have a good connection for your fan switch. It's just a good idea to clean it. Open this plug and let it drain. As you're letting it drain, you can come up top and fiddle with the radiator cap to get it to drain faster or slower. And you can look down, you can watch it drain. Once it's fully drained, you can replace the drain plug. And if you're going to flush it, you can flush it. Then you refill the system. If you have a top T to put coolant in your high spot first, what I did was I filled up my reservoir, and then I started to slowly fill the system from here with the radiator cap off. Slowly fill it so air has its time to work through the system, and you can hear it work through the system really well until coolant comes out the radiator cap. Then you close the cap. You can squeeze your hoses to get air out of the system. Those are your 3 hoses. And then you can fill this up and put the cap on. Now before I go any further, I'm going to tell you how this system works. There's your heat pump, your water pump down here. It drives off the engine. Water goes through the thermostat, through this hose, into the block. Through the block, back out here to the hose. And again, around it goes, around it goes, around it goes. Off of the pathways inside the engine, this feed comes up, feeds the heater coil, comes back out and returns down to the pump, but that's just off of the main loop. When your thermostat opens, what it does is it allows water to come up, or coolant to come up from the bottom of the radiator into this assembly, which I'm assuming has a number of baffles in it, to mix with this main feed into the engine. So now it's drawing this cooler coolant from the radiator up into the system, and it's mixing with it in here. So it mixes with the water coming out of the block to this main hose back into the engine. When this thermostat opens and allows water to come through the bottom hose, what it does by allowing that to come through is water will also not only go into the block, but it will also go down this hose and start to travel through the radiator as well. So when that valve opens, it not only creates this loop here, but it creates this loop here. So you have coolant flowing from all loops. And this is a cooling loop. This is also a cooling loop, but this is drawing heat off of the engine. This is drawing cool air through the radiator. So now you have the hot coming off, mixing with the cool coming in, and it recirculates through the whole system. Okay, this is where a lot of us get hung up. If you have an air bubble in this long hose that comes up about 14 inches from the bottom of the radiator, if you have air in here, Air is a fluid. So what happens is so technically with a little bit of coolant in here and water, this is full of fluid. So what happens is when this thermostat opens, this is what happened to me. This thermostat opened and it allowed water or fluid to come up and into the system. What happens is, because this is already full of fluid and there's baffles in here, I can only assume, there was too much pressure on this side to allow this flow to draw the air and purge it out of this hose. And it wasn't drawing any fluid either, because this created resistance. And what happened is the water goes through, it encounters resistance here, because this isn't able to pull up through. The water wants to push through here as well as the block, but it won't push through here because it goes so far and it encounters resistance down here. So the water takes the path of least resistance back into your engine. It gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And then you say, oh, my thermostat's not open. Oh, my fan's not running. Why is that happening? Because this resistance isn't letting the water go through this system. So what happens is you feel this hose and it's hot. You feel the radiator and it's hot. You say, oh my God, what's going on? Well, if you feel the bottom of your radiator, and it's not hot, but it's hot at the top of this hose, and it's hot at the top of this hose, but the bottom of your radiator is not as hot. This side of the radiator is not going to be as hot as this side of the radiator, because thermal conduction is going to heat the water through this hose. It's going to heat the water through this hose down here, but it's not going to get to the bottom. Not until your car reaches probably 300 and 350 degrees is it going to be enough to trip your thermostat to turn your fan on. It's not going to be enough to heat this whole radiator. By the time it heats this whole radiator through thermal conductivity, your whole engine's going to be blazing hot. So we usually shut it down and we say, oh, my heater fan switch isn't working. Oh, my thermostat's not opening. Your thermostat's fine. It's opening. If it worked before, it'll work after. Your thermostat's opening, but because of this resistance, it's not allowing the water to push through, get pulled through the radiator. It encounters resistance and goes into the engine. So what do? So if you get your system up and running and everything's full, you inspect your caps, your reservoir, everything's full, your bleeder valve, your bleeder screw, everything's full, and it's cool at the bottom while your system is running. What you do is you take this off. And you take this off, and all of the water in the radiator at this level is going to push down until it seeks level right about here. So the second you take this hose off, coolant is going to start coming out as air escapes. And once you see coolant in this hose, I took the hose completely off and it was full of coolant and it gushed, and I put it back on this assembly. As soon as I started screwing this back up, I noticed, oh, this hose feels like it's got fluid in it now. I could actually feel the fluid in there, whereas before it felt like it had air in there. I hooked the system back up, I closed everything up, I topped it up again, didn't take much, started it up, and guess what? After a few minutes, the bottom of the radiator started getting warm uniformly from left to right. This hose started to get really warm, the top of the radiator started to get really warm, especially over here as well, and we realized that the air trapped in here was creating too much resistance for the water to pull through the open thermostat. So the system was working fine. It was drawing through both loops, and after a few minutes, the bottom of the radiator, I felt it. If you get down on the ground, back to where that bleeder screw was, and you feel the bottom of the radiator up there. I know I was pointing at the sway bar, but if you feel the bottom of the radiator where the switch is, you can tell that, oh, this sucker's getting warm now. Just wait. The fan came on and the system's fine, working perfectly. So if your system is working before and it's not working after, it's probably because you have air trapped in the system right here. Once you bleed that air, the system works perfectly fine.